People always say you'll recognize the moment your heart breaks, but for Emma, it didn't shatter with screaming or tears. It was quiet, too quiet. She stood in the doorway of their small shared apartment, still holding the groceries she'd bought to make his favorite dinner while Nathan packed his last duffel bag without meeting her eyes. The walls that had once heard their laughter now echoed with absence, as if the room itself knew something sacred had ended. "I just think we want different things," he had said 2 nights before after coming home late, wearing cologne he never wore for her. Emma didn't ask who she was. She didn't need to. The answer was in the way he'd stopped dreaming out loud with her, in the way he started looking over her shoulder instead of into her eyes. The woman was rich, everyone in town whispered it. An investor's daughter, someone with yachts and private jets and old family names. Emma had only her art, her stubbornness, and her late mother's necklace. That night, she didn't cry. She sat on the kitchen floor with a bottle of wine and remembered the first time Nathan told her he loved her. It felt like it belonged to someone else now. She wasn't bitter yet, just stunned by how easily people can erase the life you built with them when a shinier one walks by. Emma's world didn't fall apart all at once. It crumbled in details. The mornings were the worst. Waking up in a half-empty bed, still rolling over to a space where his warmth used to linger, only to be met with cold sheets and a sinking heart. Their routines became ghosts, brushing her teeth next to silence, making 2 cups of coffee before remembering. She was alone. Social media was cruel. Pictures of Nathan started to appear with the woman, always cropped just enough to suggest luxury, just enough to sting. Emma deactivated her accounts but couldn't deactivate the ache. She tried distracting herself with work at the gallery, sketching at cafes, even dating apps, but nothing felt like it belonged. Her friends offered generic comfort. He wasn't worth it. You'll find better. Focus on yourself. But heartbreak has a way of making even the truth sound hollow. And still, she didn't hate him. That was the hardest part. She missed his terrible dance moves, the way he'd read novels out loud in funny voices, the dreams they shared while lying on the roof of their building. He had loved her once deeply, and that truth lingered like a bruise. But every day, she rose, dressed with dignity, and tried again. Not to move on, not yet, but to prove to herself that she still existed beyond him, that she could reclaim the space he left behind with something even more powerful. Her self-doubt, it wasn't revenge that pushed Emma forward, it was survival. She started painting again, not for commissions or gallery exhibits, but because the silence in her apartment begged for color. At first, it was messy. Angry reds, lonely blues, strokes that screamed louder than she ever could. But then, something shifted. Her hands began to remember softness, patience, even beauty. One afternoon, while setting up a piece near the gallery window, a man in a dark suit stopped and watched her work. He didn't interrupt, he just observed, calm, attentive. A week later, the gallery owner mentioned someone anonymously purchased Emma's entire collection on display. Every piece, no note, no name, just a wire transfer with a sum that made her blink twice. Emma didn't know what it meant, but for the first time in months, she felt seen, not for her sadness, not for her past, but for what she could create. Something was changing. The world wasn't healing her. She was stitching herself back together, one brushstroke at a time. And though she didn't know it yet, this quiet return to herself was being watched more closely than she realized. Not by Nathan, not by her friends, but by someone whose life she had unknowingly already entered. A man who didn't need to impress anyone. A man whose empire had eyes everywhere. And who had just taken a very quiet interest in the woman who had been left behind. Julian Vaughn wasn't the kind of billionaire who made headlines for yachts or scandals. His name didn't echo in tabloids but in boardrooms, silent, powerful, and rarely seen. He had built his empire through strategic acquisitions, always a few steps ahead of everyone else. But power, in Julian's world, didn't mean noise, it meant control. And he liked to watch before he moved. When he first saw Emma through the gallery glass, he wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was one of those days where he needed silence and ended up finding a woman pouring her soul into a canvas. There was something honest about her. Work, something wounded, but proud. He didn't know her name then, but her art stayed in his mind long after the car pulled away. Over the next few weeks, he quietly researched her. Not invasively, just enough to understand the pieces she wasn't putting on display. Her name, her past exhibits. The story of her recent heartbreak that had become an open secret in the city's inner circles. He didn't feel pity. Julian wasn't wired that way. He felt curiosity. And curiosity in his world usually meant something more. Emma had a depth he hadn't encountered in a long time. Not in his polished meetings, not in the world of people who smiled with contracts in their hands. There was no agenda, no play. Just the echo of something real, and Julian had spent a lifetime surrounded by everything, but that Emma didn't know Julian's name when they first spoke. She only knew he returned to the gallery, this time stepping inside with the kind of calm presence that shifted the air without demanding it. He asked about one of her newer pieces, a painting of a cracked porcelain teacup with gold pouring from the break. "Kintsugi," she had said softly, explaining the Japanese art of mending broken things with gold, making them more beautiful for having been broken. He didn't say much, just nodded, his eyes staying on the painting longer than on her. But before he left, he asked if she ever did private commissions. She hesitated. Most people wanted portraits or something to match a sofa. But something in the way he asked made her curious too. She agreed to consider it. Over the next few days, he sent a note, handwritten, asking if she'd be open to coffee, no pressure, no pretense. She found herself rereading the note more than she cared to admit. He hadn't tried to impress her. There was no flash, no mention of who he was or what he owned. Just steady interest, the kind that didn't look past her. And so, on a Thursday afternoon when the clouds were thick but not threatening, she met him at a quiet cafe tucked into a street she used to walk with Nathan. She wasn't ready for anything, not love, not even friendship, but she showed up anyway. And that mattered more than she realized. The conversation between them wasn't magical in the cinematic sense. There were no grand confessions, no sparks flying across the table. It was slower than that, honest. Julian asked questions most men never thought to ask, and more importantly, he listened. Emma found herself speaking more freely than she expected, her voice stumbling at first, then steadying as she described the mess of rebuilding after being discarded. She talked about art, about how grief lives in color, about how betrayal doesn't always leave a scar you can see. Julian didn't interrupt or fix. He just sat there, occasionally nodding, offering nothing but presence. When the coffee was finished and they stood outside beneath a gray sky, he didn't lean in, didn't ask for another date. He simply said, "Thank you for your time. I'd like to see more of your work sometime." And she walked home feeling something she hadn't in a long while, not butterflies, but respect. That night, she didn't cry or overthink, she painted. Not to forget Nathan, but because for once, someone had looked at her and seen more than the woman he left. And slowly, the bitterness that had threatened to calcify inside her began to melt. Julian's name still meant nothing to her. He hadn't mentioned his last name or what he did. But for now, he was just a man who saw her, without trying to possess her. And sometimes, that's where everything really begins. Emma didn't know how or when it shifted, only that the cafe became a ritual, once a week, then twice. They never called them dates, just catching up. But something was growing in the spaces between their silences, something quiet and real. She started to notice the way Julian's eyes lingered on people when they spoke, like he was searching for what wasn't being said. He had a way of making her feel like her words mattered, not because he flattered her, but because he didn't rush them. And yet, even as she became more comfortable with him, there was still a part of her that held back. She didn't know who he was, not really. He never brought up work, and she didn't press. She liked the mystery. It made her feel like the playing field was finally even. But that illusion cracked one afternoon when her friend Maya sent her a message with a screenshot, a business article announcing a massive acquisition in the tech world. The man in the photo? Julian Vaughn, CEO, Billionaire. The headline read, Vaughn Industries acquires Nathan Caldwell's startup in landmark deal. Emma stared at the image for minutes. Her heart didn't race, it paused. The man she'd been meeting for coffee had just bought out the man who broke her. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. And in that moment, a strange question emerged. Had Julian known who she was all along? Emma tried to pretend nothing had changed, but silence has a way of shouting when it's left unspoken. The next time she met Julian, she arrived early, heart tangled in confusion. He greeted her the same way he always did, calm, warm, with a gentle smile that didn't overreach. But Emma wasn't the same. She stirred her coffee 3 times. Before speaking, "You bought his company," she said quietly, not accusing, not wounded, just searching. Julian didn't flinch. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I did." He didn't explain, didn't justify, just own the truth. Like someone who never learned to lie to protect himself. Emma looked at him then, really looked. "Did you know about me before we met?" she asked, the question hanging in the space between them like wet air before a storm. Julian hesitated. Not because he was caught, but because the answer mattered. "Yes," he said, "I knew. But I didn't approach you because of him. I kept showing up because of you." There was no script, no defense, no dramatic gesture. Just a man telling her something hard and meaning it. Emma felt the weight of that truth settle into her chest, heavy but not cruel. For the first time in months, she wasn't someone's leftover or lesson. She was the decision. And in Julian's calm, unwavering honesty, she realized something deeper. He didn't come into her life to fix what Nathan broke. He came to witness what she was still capable of becoming. In the days that followed, Emma found herself torn between disbelief and a quiet, blooming trust. She replayed every moment with Julian, his restraint, his respect, his silences that didn't demand anything from her. If he had wanted revenge on Nathan, he could have done it in boardrooms, behind press releases, with corporate lawyers. But he never used her for that. He never mentioned Nathan at all. Their connection had been built without leverage, without strategy, just time and attention. Still, part of Emma feared what people would say, that she had moved on with a man. Richer, more powerful, as if it somehow erased the pain. But this wasn't about wealth. Julian's world, as intimidating as it was, hadn't changed the way he looked at her, with patience, with genuine interest, with space. And slowly, Emma began to live differently. She laughed again, in small ways at first, then freely. She painted without anger. She reactivated her art page, started receiving requests not because of pity, but because her work spoke something raw and new. And Julian? He kept his distance when she needed it, never rushing her healing, never assuming. A place in her life, always waiting for her to open the door, not kick it in. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still doubts, bad days, and shadows of the past, but Emma had changed. She no longer lived to be chosen, she chose. And in that power, her story stopped being about who left her and started becoming about who she decided to become. Months passed, and the city no longer felt like a reminder of what Emma had lost. It became a quiet witness to what she was building. Her art was featured in a downtown exhibit sponsored by an anonymous patron, though she knew now exactly who had made it happen. Julian stood in the back that night, far from the spotlight, just as he always did. When their eyes met across the room, she didn't feel nervous or indebted. She felt proud. Not because of the attention or the sale offers that followed, but because she had earned every canvas, every color, every quiet applause. Nathan was there too. She hadn't expected that. He walked in late, arm in arm with the woman he had chosen her over. But something about him was different now. Tired. Smaller. As if the version of himself he had chased wasn't everything he hoped. He stopped in front of one of her pieces, a stark, raw portrait of a woman with her back turned, walking into a sea of gold. He stared for a while, then turned to her. "Is that supposed to be you?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Emma smiled. Not with cruelty, but with peace. "It was," she said. And just like that, he became part of the past again, not with drama, but with closure. She didn't owe him rage or forgiveness, just distance. And in that moment, she realized healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just walks away, quietly, powerfully. After the exhibit, Emma stepped outside to breathe, the city air cool against her skin, laced with the quiet hum of a world that had kept turning even when hers had paused. Julian joined her, no fanfare, just his presence. He handed her a glass of water, not champagne, and stood beside her like he always had, unassuming, steady. "You didn't need to come tonight," she said softly, eyes still on the skyline. "I wanted to," he replied. "Not to be seen. Just to see you." That distinction mattered. It always had. She turned to him, studying the man who had once watched her through gallery glass, never interrupting, never imposing. And now he stood beside her not as a rescuer, but as a witness to what she'd rebuilt. Emma reached for his hand, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. It was the first time she touched him like that, and Julian understood the weight behind it. There was no applause, no dramatic kiss, just a silence filled with mutual recognition. She wasn't the same woman Nathan had walked away from. She was more, not because she found someone richer, but because she discovered she was never lacking in the first place. Julian hadn't completed her. He had simply arrived when she finally remembered her own worth. And as they stood together, facing nothing but the night, Emma realized she had become something Nathan could never buy. Free doubt in the weeks that followed. There were no grand declarations between Emma and Julian, only consistency. He invited her into his world slowly, never flaunting it, never expecting her to be impressed. And she never performed, never tried to prove she belonged. They existed in parallel strength. Two people who had known different kinds of loneliness, now choosing to walk side by side. Emma still painted in her small studio, even when Julian offered to build her a larger one. "This space has my fingerprints," she said. "It reminds me where I started," he understood. And that was the difference. He never needed her to be anything but who she was. When articles began circulating, from Heartbreak to Billionaire's Muse, Emma didn't flinch. She smiled. Let them write what they wanted. She knew the truth. She wasn't a trophy. She was the fire that melted down the version of herself who once believed she had to be chosen to be valuable. The irony, of course, wasn't lost on her. Nathan had left her for someone richer. But in the end, she didn't just find someone wealthier. She found someone deeper. And not because he had money, but because he had silence, patience, and truth. That was the twist no one saw coming. The woman discarded without a second thought became the one who stood tallest without needing to shout, not out of revenge, but because she'd finally remembered how to stand for herself.